There are mornings when the world wakes up softly, and there are mornings when the soul itself begins to whisper. This Sunday morning is not just another turning of the clock, not merely another sunrise stretching gold across the sky. No, beloved, this morning is a sacred invitation. It is a holy pause between yesterday's battles and tomorrow's unknown roads. It is the gentle voice of God saying, "Be still, my child. I am already standing at the door of your home." Some of us have entered this day carrying burdens too heavy to name. Some have smiled before people while silently breaking behind closed doors. Some homes have known worry instead of peace, fear instead of rest, division instead of love. Yet even now, through every cracked window of doubt and every weary corner of the heart, the unseen hand of God is moving. We do not always see his hand, but we have survived because of it. There were accidents that never happened because his angels stood guard. There were storms that could have destroyed us, but mercy whispered, "Not today." There were nights when tears soaked our pillows, and somehow morning still found us breathing, still hoping, still standing. That was not luck. That was not chance. That was the unseen hand of heaven carrying us when our strength had already run dry. Today we gather in faith to pray over our homes, not just the walls and windows, but the souls living inside them. We pray for peace to sit at our tables. We pray for laughter to return to rooms that have become too quiet with sorrow. We pray that every spirit of fear, confusion, sickness, and despair must leave in the mighty name of God. And we dare on this Sunday morning to invite miracles, not because we are perfect, not because we have never doubted, but because grace still knocks on imperfect doors, because God has always chosen ordinary people for extraordinary blessings, because miracles are born where faith refuses to die. So let this prayer rise like incense from every tired heart listening today. Let every mother covering her children in prayer feel heaven surrounding her house. Let every father carrying silent worries know he is not walking alone. Let every lonely soul discover that God has already entered the room before the prayer even began. Today we trust the unseen hand, the hand that protects, the hand that restores, the hand that opens doors no enemy can shut, the hand that plants hope where darkness once lived, the hand that can turn a troubled house into a sanctuary of peace. And as this Sunday unfolds, may your home become more than a place of shelter. May it become holy ground. May love return. May healing begin. May unexpected blessings arrive. May miracles walk through your front door like morning sunlight breaking through the night. For the God who watches over you never sleeps, and his unseen hand is already moving. There comes a season in every life when the road ahead grows dim and the answers we once demanded from heaven fall silent in our hands. It is a sacred and trembling place, that moment between prayer and manifestation, between tears and testimony, between the breaking and the becoming. And yet, beloved, it is often there, in the dark soil of uncertainty, that faith first learns how to breathe. For anybody can trust God when the bills are paid, when the doctor's report brings relief, when the family is gathered in joy around a warm table, when the doors swing open at the exact moment we knock. It is easy to sing songs of praise beneath a cloudless sky, but real faith, the kind that shakes chains loose from the soul, is born when the sky is heavy with thunder and still you whisper, "Lord, I trust you anyway." There are nights when God feels quiet. Not absent, but quiet. And silence can trouble the human heart more than storms do. We are creatures who crave signs. We want certainty wrapped neatly in our hands. We want tomorrow explained before we step into it. We want the whole staircase illuminated before we dare place one trembling foot upon the first step. But God, in his holy wisdom, often gives us just enough light for the next breath, the next prayer, the next dawn. Because faith is not built on seeing. Faith is built on knowing.
Knowing that the same God who carried you through yesterday has not forgotten your name today.
Somebody listening has prayed until your voice became weary. You have asked heaven for direction while the hallway of your life remained closed and silent. You have begged God to reveal his plan, yet all you received was waiting. And waiting, child, can feel like a wilderness. It can feel like standing beside a river and dying of thirst because the answer has not yet arrived. But do not mistake God's silence for abandonment. The earth itself teaches us this truth. Seeds disappear beneath the ground long before flowers rise to the sun. Winter trees look lifeless before spring whispers green into their branches again. The caterpillar vanishes into darkness before it returns wearing wings. Just because you cannot see movement does not mean heaven is not working. God has always done some of his greatest miracles in hidden places. He formed oceans in silence. He shaped mountains in silence. He placed stars in the heavens without asking humanity for permission to understand the process. And perhaps even now, he is shaping your miracle where your eyes cannot yet reach. Oh, there is a pain that comes from not knowing. A mother waits for her child to return home safely. A father wonders how he will provide one more month for his family. A widow sits alone at the kitchen table speaking prayers into an empty chair. A weary soul lies awake at 3 a.m. asking God questions too deep for words, and still heaven waits. Not because God delights in suffering, but because there are lessons only the valley can teach. The valley teaches endurance. The valley teaches surrender. The valley teaches us that sometimes God's hand is strongest when our own strength has finally fallen away. There are people who look powerful because life has never tested them. But the ones who carry real wisdom, real grace, real compassion in their spirit are often the ones who survived seasons they thought would destroy them. They are the people who learned how to worship while wounded. They are the souls who discovered that faith is not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep walking while fear trembles beside you. And perhaps that is where you are today. Perhaps you are carrying unanswered prayers like stones in your pocket. Perhaps disappointment has wrapped itself around your heart so tightly you no longer remember what hope feels like. Perhaps you smile in public while privately wondering if God still hears your voice. But hear this clearly, God has not forgotten you. The same hand that painted sunrise across the morning sky still holds your life with tenderness beyond human understanding. The same God who parted seas, healed broken bodies, and lifted the forgotten from despair is still moving even when your natural eyes cannot see him. Faith requires courage because it asks us to believe before evidence arrives, and that is no small thing. It means praying before the miracle, singing before the breakthrough, trusting before the answer, resting before the door opens. It means saying, Lord, I do not understand this season, but I will not let go of your hand. There is a holy beauty in that kind of trust. Not loud, not boastful, but deep as rivers running beneath the earth. It is the faith of grandmothers who prayed over children they might never see healed. The faith of men who kept working honestly while the world rewarded corruption. The faith of ordinary people who buried loved ones with tears in their eyes and still lifted trembling hands toward heaven saying, Blessed be the name of the Lord. That kind of faith shakes darkness because the enemy expects people to trust God only when life is easy. But when a wounded soul still chooses belief, still chooses kindness, still chooses prayer in the middle of heartbreak, heaven itself bears witness to that courage. And slowly, quietly, something begins to happen inside the waiting soul. Strength grows where panic once lived. Peace enters places anxiety once ruled. Hope rises again like dawn after a long night. Not because circumstances changed overnight, but because trust changed the spirit within. Sometimes God calms the storm. Sometimes he calms his child while the storm still rages. Either way, it is still a miracle. Beloved, there are blessings moving toward you that you cannot yet see. There are dangers God has already blocked that you will never know existed. There are closed doors protecting you from rooms that would have broken your spirit. And there are delays that are not punishment but preparation. One day you will look back over your life and understand why certain prayers were not answered the way you demanded. One day the puzzle pieces of your sorrow will form a picture of mercy so profound it will bring tears to your eyes. One day you will thank God for carrying you through valleys you begged to escape. But until that day comes, faith asks only this: keep walking. Walk through uncertainty. Walk through disappointment. Walk through unanswered questions. Walk through grief if you must. But do not stop believing that God walks beside you. For every sunrise is proof that darkness does not win forever. And if God can command morning to rise faithfully after every night, surely he can bring light to the unanswered places of your life. So tonight, or this morning, whenever these words find you, release your need to control every outcome. Lay your fear gently at the feet of the one who sees beyond human understanding. Trust that heaven is still writing chapters your eyes have not yet read. Trust the unseen hand, the hand that steadies you when your knees grow weak, the hand that shelters your home while danger passes by, the hand that wipes hidden tears no one else notices, the hand that keeps making a way where there appears to be none. And if all you can offer God today is one exhausted whisper saying, "I still trust you," let that be enough. Because even trembling faith can move mountains. And even in silence, God is still working miracles. Home is more than wood and nails, more than curtains hanging in windows or photographs resting quietly upon the walls. A home is where the soul removes its armor. It is where tired hearts come searching for rest after the world has bruised them. It is where children learn the language of love before they ever understand the language of the world. And because home is sacred, the storms of life so often try to enter there first. The enemy of peace understands something many people forget. If he can disturb the home, he can trouble the heart of every person living inside it. So we pray, not weak prayers tossed carelessly into the air, but deep prayers rising from the marrow of the spirit. Prayers spoken with trembling faith and stubborn hope. Prayers whispered over sleeping children. Prayers breathed across dinner tables. Prayers cried through tears when the night feels too heavy to carry alone. There is power in praying over your home, not because the walls themselves are holy, but because God honors the faith of those who invite him inside. Some houses are filled with noise, yet starving for peace. Some families share the same roof while carrying oceans of silence between them. Some homes have known laughter once, but grief arrived and sat down in the living room like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. Bills pile high upon counters. Anxiety creeps through bedrooms after midnight. Marriages grow weary beneath unspoken wounds. Children wrestle with fears they cannot explain. And still, beloved, God sees every hidden ache. He sees the mother standing at the sink praying softly for her family while pretending she is not exhausted. He sees the father lying awake at night carrying worries too heavy to speak aloud. He sees the lonely grandmother asking heaven to protect children she cannot always reach. He sees the young person silently battling despair behind a closed bedroom door. Nothing inside your home escapes the eyes of God. That is why prayer matters. Prayer changes the atmosphere of a house before it changes the circumstances within it. It invites heaven into ordinary rooms. It fills empty corners with unseen strength. It reminds fear that it does not own the final word. There are homes where arguments echo louder than kindness. Homes where stress has stolen tenderness from conversations. Homes where financial hardship has wrapped itself around the family like winter cold. And slowly, without realizing it, people begin surviving together instead of truly living together. But prayer interrupts that darkness. Prayer walks through the front door carrying light. For there is something sacred that happens when somebody lifts their voice and says, "Lord, dwell here." Heaven listens. Angels move. Peace begins settling gently over troubled places like morning dew resting upon thirsty ground. You may not see it immediately, but spiritual protection is often working long before visible change arrives. Perhaps God protects your child from danger you never knew existed. Perhaps he softens an angry heart before cruel words can wound deeper. Perhaps he blocks sickness, confusion, destruction, and despair from entering your household. There are blessings we celebrate openly, And there are disasters heaven quietly prevented without ever announcing them. How many accidents did God stop? How many temptations did he shield your family from? How many nights did his angels stand guard while you slept unaware? Oh, if heaven ever pulled back the curtain and allowed us to see how often we were protected, we would spend the rest of our lives on our knees in gratitude. The world teaches people to secure their homes with locks, cameras, gates, and alarms. And while wisdom has its place, no earthly system can guard a house the way the presence of God can. Because danger does not always arrive carrying weapons. Sometimes it enters through bitterness, through addiction, through depression, through hopelessness, through division so quiet it slowly erodes the spirit of a family from within. That is why every home needs prayer. Not polished religion without compassion. Not empty rituals without love, but living prayer. Prayer that says, God, let peace sit at this table. Lord, let forgiveness live in these rooms. Protect our minds from fear. Protect our children from harm. Protect our relationships from division. Protect this house from anything sent to steal joy and destroy hope. There is no shame in praying over your doorway. No shame in praying through tears. No shame in calling upon God when life feels uncertain. For some of the strongest people in history were people who knew how to pray. Prayer carried ancestors through slavery. Prayer carried mothers through wars. Prayer carried fathers through poverty. Prayer carried weary souls through seasons when survival itself became an act of courage. And the same God who protected generations before you still watches over your home today. Beloved, never underestimate the spiritual atmosphere you create within your house. Words matter there. Kindness matters there. Mercy matters there. Children remember the spirit of a home long after they forget the furniture inside it. A house filled with constant anger leaves bruises no eyes can see, but a house filled with prayer plants roots of security deep inside the human heart. Even when life is imperfect, even when struggles remain, even when money is tight and answers are delayed, the presence of love and prayer can transform survival into sanctuary. Sometimes protection looks dramatic, like danger turning away at the last moment. But sometimes protection looks quiet. It looks like strength arriving just when a family thought they would break. It looks like patience replacing rage. It looks like reconciliation after years of distance. It looks like a child finding hope again. It looks like peace settling into anxious hearts little by little, day by day. Miracles are not always loud. Sometimes miracles whisper. And one of the greatest miracles in this troubled world is a peaceful home. A place where people feel safe enough to cry, safe enough to heal, safe enough to laugh again after sorrow, safe enough to believe tomorrow may still hold goodness. The enemy wants homes filled with chaos because chaos exhausts the soul. But God desires homes filled with grace. Not perfect homes, not flawless families, but homes where love keeps returning after mistakes. Homes where prayer keeps rising after disappointment. Homes where people keep choosing one another despite human weakness. So if your home feels troubled today, do not surrender to despair. Pray there. Pray in the kitchen while washing dishes. Pray in the hallway while the house sleeps. Pray over your children before school. Pray over your spouse in silence if necessary. Pray when the lights are bright. Pray when tears fall in darkness. For every whispered prayer becomes a seed planted into the spiritual soil of your household. And seeds watered in faith will bloom in due season. One day the atmosphere may shift so gently you almost miss it. Conversations become softer, hearts become lighter, laughter returns unexpectedly, strength rises again, fear loses its grip, peace settles where anxiety once ruled. That is the quiet work of God, protecting, healing, restoring. And even if your home has known brokenness, remember this truth. God specializes in entering shattered places and creating beauty there. He is not afraid of wounded families. He is not intimidated by chaos. He is not discouraged by what appears impossible. The Lord can walk into the darkest room of a house and still command light to appear. So today, invite Him in again. Invite Him into every room carrying hidden pain. Invite Him into every strained relationship. Invite Him into every financial burden, every fearful thought, every restless night, and trust that the unseen hand of God is still resting upon your home. A hand strong enough to protect, tender enough to comfort, wise enough to guide, faithful enough to remain. For as long as God watches over your house, no darkness can stay forever. Morning will come again. Peace will return again. Love will rise again. And your home, touched by the presence of heaven, can become a refuge not only for your family, but for every weary soul who enters through its doors. There is a sacred hunger that lives inside the human spirit, a quiet longing that no amount of routine can fully satisfy. It rises in the stillness of early mornings when the world has not yet learned to speak, and it lingers in the silence of midnight when even sleep feels far away. It is the yearning for something more than survival, something deeper than habit, something holy enough to remind the heart that life is still capable of wonder. That longing is where miracles are born, not in grand displays that only a few are allowed to witness, but in the hidden spaces of ordinary living where faith dares to stretch its hands beyond what is visible. For a miracle is not always lightning splitting the sky or oceans parting before trembling feet. Sometimes a miracle is simply peace returning to a mind that has known only chaos. Sometimes it is a door opening when every human calculation said it would remain closed. Sometimes it is a heart learning to love again after it had sworn never to trust. And yet many people walk through their days forgetting that miracles are not relics of the past. They are not locked away in ancient pages or reserved for distant stories. They are living possibilities, breathing quietly beside every moment of human life, waiting for faith to recognize them. We often reduce life to what can be measured. We count money, we measure time, we calculate success, we weigh disappointment. But miracles do not submit easily to numbers. They do not obey human limitation. They arrive in ways that defy prediction, slipping through the cracks of logic and reason, reminding us that God is never bound by what the human mind can explain. To invite miracles into everyday life is to shift the posture of the soul. It is to stop living as though tomorrow depends entirely on yesterday's results. It is to release the belief that what has not happened cannot happen. It is to open the heart wide enough for divine interruption. But that kind of openness requires courage, because hope is a vulnerable thing. To expect something good when life has taught you otherwise feels almost dangerous. To believe in breakthrough when delay has been your constant companion feels like standing in the rain and daring the sun to appear. And yet, it is precisely in that tension between what is seen and what is hoped for that miracles begin their quiet work. There are people who have buried their expectations so deeply that they no longer remember how to ask for more. They have learned to settle for what is available rather than what is possible. Life has disappointed them so often that they have mistaken limitation for truth. But God has never been intimidated by human disappointment. He has always worked beyond it. Think of the ordinary moments where something shifted unexpectedly. The illness that was supposed to remain but began to fade. The opportunity that appeared after every door seemed shut. The reconciliation that arrived after years of silence. The provision that came from directions no one could have predicted. These are not accidents. These are echoes of a divine hand moving through human affairs. Yet miracles require participation. They are not imposed upon unwilling hearts. They are welcomed by faith that refuses to give up. When a person prays not as a ritual but as a lifeline, something begins to shift in the atmosphere around their life. Not always immediately visible, but undeniably active. There is a difference between wishing and believing. Wishing looks outward and hopes something changes. Believing looks upward and trusts that something already is changing, even if it has not yet arrived. And so the invitation becomes clear. Expect God in the ordinary. Expect Him in the moments that feel repetitive. Expect Him in conversations that seem insignificant. Expect Him in delays that appear meaningless. Expect Him in doors that seem permanently shut. For what appears delayed is not always denied. Sometimes it is being prepared. Sometimes it is being aligned. Sometimes it is being protected from arriving too soon. There is a wisdom in divine timing that human urgency often cannot understand. A seed does not complain that it is still underground. It does not compare itself to the tree standing tall above it. It does not question why growth takes time. It simply becomes what it was created to be in the season it was meant to emerge. And so it is with miracles. They unfold according to a timing that is not rushed by fear or forced by anxiety. But the human heart struggles with waiting. Waiting exposes our need for control. It reveals how little we can truly manage. It humbles us in ways we often resist. And yet waiting is often where miracles mature. There are people listening to life right now through the sound of waiting, waiting for healing, waiting for reconciliation, waiting for provision, waiting for clarity, waiting for peace. And in that waiting, something deeper than impatience is being formed, something quieter, something stronger. Faith, not the kind that only speaks when answers are near, but the kind that continues to whisper even when answers are far away. The kind that says, even here I will trust. The kind that holds on to God not because everything makes sense, but because letting go would mean losing the only anchor that has ever truly held. To invite miracles is to remain open in the middle of uncertainty. It is to bless what has not yet changed. It is to thank God for what has not yet arrived. It is to speak hope over a life that still looks unfinished. And this kind of faith transforms the atmosphere of daily living. Suddenly, small things become sacred. A quiet moment becomes a place of prayer. A simple conversation becomes a doorway to healing. A chance encounter becomes a potential turning point. Life is no longer a series of random events, but a canvas upon which unseen grace is continuously painting. There is also a shift in how struggle is understood. Struggle is no longer seen as abandonment, but as preparation. Delay is no longer seen as rejection, but as refinement. Silence is no longer seen as absence, but as unseen activity. And in that shift, the heart begins to breathe differently. Because miracles often grow in the soil of persistence. The person who refuses to stop believing eventually begins to see what others overlook. Not because their life is easier, but because their vision has been shaped by hope. They learn to recognize subtle openings where others only see walls. They learn to sense divine movement where others see stillness. They learn to wait with expectation instead of despair. And expectation is powerful. It prepares the heart to receive what fear would otherwise reject. It trains the soul to recognize blessing even when it arrives in unfamiliar form. It keeps the spirit awake to possibility when life tries to lull it into resignation. There is a miracle waiting in places you have not yet considered, in conversations you have not yet had, in paths you have not yet walked, in doors you have not yet approached, in seasons you have not yet entered. And perhaps the greatest miracle of all is not always the change of circumstance, but the change within the person who continues to believe, a fearful heart learning courage again, a broken spirit learning to hope again, a tired soul learning to rise again. So do not close your life to wonder. Do not assume that what has been defines what will be. Do not allow disappointment to become doctrine. Do not let delay convince you that divine silence means divine absence. Instead, keep your heart open. Speak as though something good is still possible. Pray as though heaven is listening even in quiet moments. Walk as though unseen doors are preparing to open ahead of you. For miracles do not always announce themselves with noise. Sometimes they arrive softly, like dawn, like breath, like peace returning after a long night. And when they come, they often reveal that God was never absent at all, but quietly working in the very fabric of your everyday life, turning ordinary moments into sacred testimonies of grace. There is a quiet battle that begins long before the world ever sees a person rise or fall. It begins in the unseen chambers of the heart, where thoughts gather like uninvited guests and whisper their stories into the soul. Fear is often one of those voices. It does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes dressed as caution. Sometimes it comes disguised as wisdom. Sometimes it even speaks in the language of memory, reminding you of what once hurt, what once failed, what once broke you. And if the heart is not careful, fear begins to sit down as though it belongs there. It learns the rhythm of your breathing. It learns the timing of your hesitation. It learns the weak places where doubt can grow. And slowly, without announcement, it begins to shape the way a person lives. Fear shrinks possibilities before they ever have a chance to form. It whispers no before opportunity can even speak. It rehearses failure so convincingly that success feels foreign, almost suspicious. It builds invisible walls around the imagination, convincing the soul that staying small is safer than becoming whole. But beloved, safety has never been the same thing as peace. There are people who are not living, they are merely avoiding. Avoiding disappointment, avoiding risk, avoiding change, avoiding anything that might awaken the old pain they have worked so hard to forget. Yet in that avoidance, something precious is slowly surrendered, the fullness of life itself. Fear does not always destroy suddenly. Sometimes it erodes quietly. A dream delayed too long. A voice silenced too often. A step never taken. A door never opened. A prayer never fully believed. And yet even in hearts shaped by fear, faith waits. Faith does not shout to be noticed. It does not force its way into the center of attention. It waits like a steady light beneath layers of uncertainty, patient and unwavering, ready to rise the moment the soul turns toward it. To let fear leave and faith enter is not a single decision. It is a daily surrender. It is waking up and choosing not to rehearse yesterday's pain. It is choosing not to let memory dictate destiny. It is choosing to believe that what hurt you before does not have to define what heals you now. There is a sacred courage in that choice. Because fear is familiar, it feels like protection. It has been with you through storms. It has convinced you that without it you might not survive. But fear is a poor guardian of the soul. It keeps you alive, perhaps, but never truly free. Faith, on the other hand, asks for trust without guarantees. It asks you to step forward without knowing where the ground will land. It asks you to speak hope when silence feels safer. It asks you to believe in healing when the wound is still visible. It asks you to pray when nothing around you suggests prayer has worked before. And still, faith does not abandon you in the asking. There is a moment every person meets, sometimes more than once, when fear and faith stand side by side, each offering a different future. Fear offers control, but limits expansion. Faith offers uncertainty, but opens possibility. Fear says, stay where you can predict the outcome. Faith says, step where you must trust the unseen, and the soul must choose which voice it will follow. Some people spend years negotiating with fear, trying to make it smaller before they move forward. But fear does not shrink through negotiation. It shrinks through movement, through action, through the quiet rebellion of choosing trust even when trembling still lies in the hands. There are hearts listening today that know what it feels like to be trapped inside invisible fear. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough, fear of starting again, fear of trusting again, fear of hoping again. And yet, even those fears are not stronger than the human capacity to rise, because something within the spirit remembers freedom, even when life has taught captivity. Something deep within the soul remembers light, even when darkness has been familiar. Something within creation itself resists being permanently bound. That something is faith. Faith is not denial of reality. It is the refusal to let reality be the final authority over what God can do. It does not pretend that pain does not exist. It simply refuses to believe that pain has the last word. When faith enters a life, it does not erase storms. It teaches you how to stand within them without collapsing. It does not always remove the valley. It teaches you how to walk through it without losing yourself. It does not always silence fear instantly, but it begins to speak louder than fear over time. And slowly something begins to shift inside the person who chooses faith. The breath becomes steadier. The thoughts become less chaotic. The future begins to feel less like a threat and more like a possibility. Fear loses its authority when it is no longer obeyed. There is a quiet power in refusing to agree with fear's predictions. Fear will say, "You will not make it." Faith replies, "I am still here." Fear will say, "It will not work." Faith replies, "I am still moving forward." Fear will say, "You are alone." Faith replies, "I am not abandoned." And with each refusal, fear begins to lose ground. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, like darkness retreating in the presence of morning light. There is also a deeper healing that happens when faith enters, the rewriting of identity. Fear often tells a person who they are not strong enough, not worthy enough, not capable enough, not loved enough. And after enough repetition, those lies begin to feel like truth. But faith speaks a different language. Faith says you are still becoming. Faith says you are still held. Faith says you are still seen. Faith says you are still chosen for something greater than your fear. And when the heart begins to believe faith more than fear, transformation begins quietly but profoundly. You begin to risk again. You begin to trust again. You begin to pray again with expectation instead of hesitation. You begin to open doors you once avoided. You begin to speak words you once swallowed. Life expands where fear once restricted it. There is no shame in admitting that fear has lived in you. Fear is human. It visits every life in some form, but it was never meant to become a permanent resident of the soul. It was never meant to govern your decisions or define your destiny. Fear is a visitor, not a ruler, and faith is the rightful atmosphere of a life aligned with hope. To let fear leave is not to pretend you are never afraid again. It is to refuse to be led by fear, to acknowledge it but not obey it, to feel it but not follow it, to name it but not be defined by it. And to let faith enter is to welcome a deeper intelligence into your life, one that sees beyond immediate circumstance, one that understands timing beyond human urgency, one that carries peace even when explanations have not yet arrived. There will still be moments when fear tries to return. Old patterns often knock on familiar doors. But each time faith has been practiced, fear finds less room to settle, because faith grows stronger with use. It is strengthened in prayer. It is strengthened in waiting. It is strengthened in choosing hope when nothing feels certain. It is strengthened in walking forward when the path is not fully visible. And eventually, what once felt like courage becomes your natural way of living. Fear no longer dictates your decisions. Faith begins to shape your perspective, and the life you once approached cautiously begins to open like a wide horizon, revealing possibilities that fear could never have shown you. So when fear whispers, listen, but do not follow. When fear warns, observe, but do not surrender. When fear remembers pain, acknowledge it, but do not relive it. And when faith speaks, quiet, steady, unshaken, let it lead you forward. For faith does not promise the absence of storms. It promises the presence of God within them. And that presence is always enough to carry a soul from captivity into freedom, from hesitation into movement, from fear into a life that finally feels like living. There are places in this world where a person can walk through the door and immediately feel the weight of life lift from their shoulders. Not because the house is grand, not because the furniture is new, not because the walls are painted in perfection, but because something unseen lives there, something gentle, something steady, something that makes the soul unclench its fists and remember what it means to rest. That something is peace, And where peace lives, love is never far behind. A home filled with peace and love is not an accident of circumstance. It is a quiet construction of many small choices, repeated day after day, often in silence, often in struggle, often when nobody is watching. It is built in the way voices are used when frustration rises. It is built in the way forgiveness is offered when pride insists on holding on. It is built in the way patience is chosen when irritation feels easier. It is built in the way people decide over and over again that love is worth protecting even when emotions are tired. But many homes do not begin this way. Some begin with dreams that slowly become strained under the weight of responsibility. Some begin with laughter that fades as bills grow heavier. Some begin with affection that is never intentionally lost, but gradually buried beneath misunderstandings, unspoken expectations, and wounds that never fully healed. And without realizing it, people begin living under the same roof, but no longer living in the same emotional space. The rooms remain the same. The hearts begin to drift. And still, beneath all of it, the possibility of peace remains alive. Because peace is not fragile. It is not absent simply because it is quiet. It is not gone simply because it has been neglected. Peace waits, patient and uncomplaining, ready to return the moment it is invited back with sincerity. Love, too, is like that. It does not disappear because it is tested. It weakens only when it is no longer nurtured. There are families who mistake silence for peace. But silence and peace are not the same. Silence can live in a house where hearts are distant. Silence can sit in rooms where people have stopped trying to understand one another. Silence can grow where communication has been replaced with assumption and withdrawal. But true peace has a different sound. It is the sound of understanding even when disagreement remains. It is the sound of forgiveness before resentment hardens. It is the sound of laughter returning after grief has visited. It is the sound of patience choosing to stay when anger tries to leave a mark. It is the sound of hearts deciding again and again to remain connected. And love is the thread that holds all of it together. Love is not only a feeling that arrives in moments of ease. Love is a discipline, a practice, a decision that must be made repeatedly, especially when circumstances make it difficult. It is choosing gentleness when frustration feels justified. It is choosing to speak softly when pride wants to shout. It is choosing to stay present when walking away would be easier. There are people who have misunderstood love as something that only exists in its best moments. But real love reveals itself most clearly in imperfect moments, in disagreements handled with respect, in apologies spoken without conditions, in forgiveness given without keeping score, and the willingness to rebuild what has been shaken. To create a home filled with peace and love, one must first accept that perfection is not the requirement. Willingness is. Willingness to grow. Willingness to listen. Willingness to heal. Willingness to begin again after misunderstanding. There are homes where everyone is waiting to be understood, yet few are willing to listen long enough to understand another. And so conversations become collisions instead of connections. Words become weapons instead of bridges, and slowly distance grows where intimacy once lived. But peace returns when listening becomes an act of love again. There is a sacred power in truly hearing another person, not preparing a response while they speak, but receiving their words with presence, not judging their emotions, but honoring their humanity. Not rushing to fix everything, but allowing space for truth to breathe. In such moments, something softens inside the atmosphere of a home. Walls that once felt tense begin to loosen. Hearts that once felt guarded begin to open. And love begins to re-enter spaces it once occupied freely. But peace is not only built through conversation, it is also built through intention. The intention to bring calm into conflict. The intention to choose respect over reaction. The intention to remember that the people in your home are not your enemies, even when emotions temporarily feel otherwise. Every home will face moments of tension. This is part of being human. But not every home allows tension to define its identity. Some homes learn how to pass through storms without becoming storms themselves. And that is where peace reveals its strength. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of grace within it. Grace that says we can disagree without destroying one another. Grace that says we can be hurt without becoming harmful. Grace that says we can speak truth without abandoning kindness. When grace enters a home, something remarkable begins to shift. The emotional temperature lowers. The urgency to be right diminishes. The desire to be understood grows stronger than the desire to win. And love, which may have been quiet for a while, begins to speak again. There are also homes where emotional wounds have never been addressed, where pain has been carried quietly from year to year, never fully named, never fully healed. And unhealed pain often speaks through behavior. It appears as anger when it is really hurt. It appears as withdrawal when it is really fear. It appears as criticism when it is really longing for connection. But love becomes transformative when it creates space for healing. The healing begins when people feel safe enough to speak honestly without fear of rejection. Healing begins when vulnerability is met not with judgment but with compassion. Healing begins when someone says, "I see your pain," instead of "Why are you like this?" And in such moments, a home becomes more than a physical shelter. It becomes a place where souls are allowed to mend. There is a kind of peace that settles only after honesty has been spoken. Not harsh honesty, but gentle honesty. The kind that does not aim to wound, but to reveal. The kind that says, "This is what I feel," instead of "This is what you did wrong." The kind that opens doors instead of closing them. Love grows in that honesty, not because everything becomes easy, but because everything becomes real. And reality, when held with care, can become the foundation of lasting connection. There are families who have forgotten how to enjoy one another. Life has become so focused on responsibilities that joy has been postponed indefinitely. But joy is not a luxury reserved for perfect moments. Joy is a spiritual necessity that helps sustain peace. A home without joy becomes heavy. A home with joy becomes resilient. Joy appears in shared laughter, in simple meals, in unexpected conversations, in moments where people remember they are not just surviving together, but living together. And love is often rediscovered through joy. Even small acts matter deeply. A kind word spoken without prompting. A helping hand offered without complaint. A moment of patience when frustration would have been easier. A choice to say, "I understand," instead of "I told you so." These are not grand gestures, but they are the quiet architecture of peace. Over time, they reshape the emotional landscape of a home, and slowly something beautiful happens. A home once filled with tension begins to soften. A home once marked by distance begins to reconnect. A home once heavy with unspoken pain begins to breathe again. Because peace, when nurtured, does not remain small. It expands, it fills corners that once felt cold. It settles into conversations that once felt strained. It becomes the atmosphere that everyone begins to notice, even if they cannot explain why. And love, when allowed to remain, becomes stronger than what once tried to divide it. So the invitation is not to create a perfect home, but to create a present one. A home where people show up emotionally, not just physically. A home where kindness is practiced, not postponed. A home where forgiveness is possible, not rare. A home where peace is chosen again and again, even when life feels heavy. For a home filled with peace and love is not built in a single moment. It is built in thousands of small decisions to remain gentle when it would be easier not to. And in those decisions, something sacred takes root. A place where the heart can finally rest and love can finally stay. There is a kind of knowing that does not depend on sight. It does not require proof written on paper or evidence displayed in the open light of day. It is deeper than what the eyes can confirm and stronger than what the mind can calculate. It is the quiet conviction that even when life appears uncertain, even when the road feels empty, even when answers refuse to arrive on time, something sacred is still moving beneath the surface of all things. That knowing is the belief in God's unseen hand, and to trust that unseen hand is to step into a way of living that refuses to be ruled by appearances alone. Because appearances can be deceiving. What looks like delay may be protection. What feels like absence may be preparation. What seems like silence may in fact be divine attention too deep for human ears to hear. Yet the human heart struggles with what it cannot see. We are taught from early days to rely on what can be measured. We trust what we can touch. We believe what can be explained. We feel safer when outcomes are predictable and paths are clearly marked. But faith invites us into a different kind of certainty, one that does not always come wrapped in visible reassurance. Faith asks us to believe that behind every closed door there may be wisdom. Behind every delay there may be timing. Behind every unanswered question there may be a purpose still unfolding. And that is not always easy to accept. There are moments in life when people look around and wonder where God has gone. They see struggle and ask why it lingers. They see injustice and ask why it continues. They see prayers spoken with sincerity and yet not answered in the way they hoped. And in those moments, doubt often tries to speak louder than trust. But doubt, though loud, is not always truth, because the unseen hand of God is not bound by human visibility. It moves in places the mind cannot map and works in ways the heart may not immediately understand. It is active even when it is not obvious, present even when it is not recognized, faithful even when it is not acknowledged. There is a mystery in divine work that humbles human certainty. A child does not always understand the guidance of a parent, yet that guidance is often rooted in protection. The child may cry when redirected, may resist when carried away from danger, may question boundaries that are meant for safety. But the parent sees what the child cannot yet comprehend. In a far greater way, God's unseen hand works with a wisdom that transcends human perception. And yet, trusting that hand requires surrender. Not a surrender of intelligence, but a surrender of control. A release of the need to understand everything before moving forward. A willingness to walk even when clarity has not yet arrived. And this surrender is often where the deepest growth begins. Because control is an illusion the human spirit clings to in order to feel safe. But life itself constantly reminds us that not everything can be controlled. Seasons change without permission. Doors open and close without consultation. Unexpected events reshape carefully laid plans. And in the midst of all this unpredictability, the soul is invited to find a deeper anchor. That anchor is trust. Trust that God is not absent in uncertainty. Trust that God is not indifferent in silence. Trust that God is not delayed in negligence, but deliberate in timing. There are lives that appear from the outside to be unfolding without direction. Yet unseen beneath the surface, threads are being woven together. Connections are forming. Protection is being placed. Lessons are being shaped. Strength is being developed in hidden places where no applause can interrupt the process. And often only in hindsight does understanding begin to form. There are moments when people look back over their lives and realize that what once felt like devastation was actually redirection. What once felt like loss was actually preservation. What once felt like rejection was actually protection from something that would have caused deeper harm. This is the paradox of divine unseen work. It is often only understood after it has passed. But faith does not wait for hindsight to believe. Faith chooses to trust in the middle of the unknown. It chooses to say, even here I am held. It chooses to say, even now I am guided. It chooses to say, even when I cannot trace the path, I trust the one who lays it. There is a quiet strength in that kind of trust. It does not deny pain. It does not ignore struggle. It does not pretend that hardship does not exist. Instead, it holds all of those realities, while still believing that they are not the final word. The unseen hand of God often works most profoundly in what appears to be stillness. In the waiting seasons where nothing seems to change on the surface, but everything is being rearranged beneath it. In the quiet years where growth is invisible but essential. In the long nights where endurance is being shaped in ways that daylight cannot yet reveal. And these seasons, though difficult, are not wasted. They are forming resilience. They are shaping character. They are deepening dependence on something greater than self. Because when life flows easily, it is easy to forget the source of strength. But when life becomes uncertain, the heart begins to remember where true help comes from. There is also a tenderness in the unseen hand of God that human language struggles to fully express. It is not only powerful but gentle, not only guiding but comforting, not only directing paths but also holding broken hearts along the way. There are people who have survived storms they thought would destroy them completely, not because they were strong enough on their own, but because something unseen sustained them when their own strength was gone. There were moments when giving up felt like the only logical option, yet somehow breath continued. Somehow morning still arrived. Somehow hope, though fragile, refused to disappear entirely. That is the unseen hand working in mercy, working in restraint, working in preservation, working in ways that often go unnoticed until survival itself becomes testimony. And so the invitation of faith is not to eliminate questions, but to prevent questions from becoming chains. It allows curiosity but not despair. It allows wonder but not surrender to hopelessness. It holds space for mystery while still choosing trust. There will always be things that remain beyond understanding. But not everything that is unknown is unsafe. Not everything that is unclear is unkind. Not everything that is delayed is denied. Sometimes what is unseen is simply unfolding in divine order. And in that unfolding, something remarkable happens within the human spirit. Anxiety begins to loosen its grip. Peace begins to take root where worry once lived. Courage begins to rise where fear once dominated. And slowly a person learns to walk through life, not by sight alone, but by trust that reaches deeper than what eyes can confirm. To believe in God's unseen hand is to live with a quiet confidence that refuses to be shaken by temporary appearances. It is to move forward even when the path is not fully lit. It is to rest even when outcomes are not yet visible. It is to hope even when circumstances suggest otherwise. And over time, this kind of belief transforms a person from within, because faith that trusts the unseen becomes stronger than fear that only trusts the visible. It becomes a steady inner compass, pointing not to what is immediately apparent, but to what is eternally faithful. And when life is finally seen in its fullness, when the scattered moments are woven into understanding, the soul often discovers that it was never walking alone. The unseen hand was there all along, guiding, protecting, redirecting, restoring, even in silence, even in waiting, even in uncertainty, always working,